Welcome back to the Zao Strength Podcast. This is your host, Jim Elli. And in today's episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with the most handsome doctor in the world, Jordan Feigenbaum from Barbell Medicine. Jordan has been someone that I've listened to and had the pleasure of meeting up with back at EPC in 2018. We spent some time down in San Diego when I was visiting, doing a seminar down there. So it was awesome to catch up with him again almost 4 years later, and just chat about the current state of the world. This episode in particular is about misinformation in the fitness industry. And you may notice already that misinformation wreaks havoc in our daily lives. It makes an impact on how we view the world, and it can impact the decisions that we make for what's best for ourselves in our day-to-day lives. And if we're not careful, misinformation can make it much more difficult for us to effectively move through our lives, achieve our goals, and ultimately understand the world as best as we can. So as you listen to this episode, think critically about how you might interpret this and what you think you can do to solve the problem of misinformation in the fitness industry. Tyson, Eckel, Jordan Feigenbaum, and myself discussed this for about an hour and a half. So we had a lot to say about it. We learned a lot. It was a lot of fun. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with your friends on social media. That would help us a lot. And without further ado, let's get right into the episode.
Like I said, misinformation goes back to, the beginning of mass, spread of information between humans, period. The invention of the printing press, dissemination of books on a large scale rather than just royalty, etc. I think the first published one, I just finished this book called Calling Bullshit by Carl Bergstrom. I forget who the second author is. Great read, by the way. And they talk about the Great Moon Hoax. This is like in the early 1800s, where the New York Sun, in a series of articles, basically described life on the moon with like these human-looking bat creatures. And the point is, it's printed in a somewhat reputable, periodical at the time, and there's no citation for like, here's where we got this information from. We just claimed it. So misinformation basically is just false or inaccurate information. And then if it's deliberately intended to deceive, you could call it disinformation. There's actually a whole organizational body working to like create criteria for this stuff, so that way you can better study it and use computer learning and stuff to like really further characterize how much misinformation, disinformation is being spread and who's doing it and why. And anyway, so as far as
there are people that are like anti-censorship. That's a concept that I find really interesting. It's like I don't even know what my take is on it. It seems like if there's a way to understand if it's what you're describing as disinformation, then yeah, I'm pro censorship in that scenario. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like you want to have these open lines of communication to ask genuine questions and obtain information, particularly high quality information, but there has to be some checks and balances there with respect to like what you can claim and stuff like that. Does that mean that I think that people should be silenced? I mean, I don't necessarily think so, but if they're spreading information irresponsibly, there has to be some sort of way to hold them responsible. For example, if you have a medical license or impersonate a medical professional and you claim all sorts of heinous things, yeah, you're gonna get got, either by the medical establishment, in your state, you'll have your medical license revoked or suspended or, otherwise, be removed, potentially legally if there's illegal cases brought against you, if you're doing stuff particularly on purpose. So that other professionals or just people who maybe aren't professionals are not held to that same level of responsibility. And so there's got to be some way, right? And I don't know what the perfect solution is, to be clear. But in any case, the question was, how do I feel about operating in the health space, fitness space, et cetera, with so much misinformation? I get very, very frustrated regularly, and I find it, I guess, overwhelming, just because there's so much out there. I think that our role at Barbell Medicine is kind of like is to be honest brokers of scientific information. We're basically saying, here's the science. We're not trying to weigh in on policy because we are not policymakers. And it's not like we're not just trying to remove ourselves from the conversation, but because creating policy is so complex, where you do need the scientists, you need the economists, you need the social scientists, you need all these experts, coming together and coming up with a plan. Because I don't have all those skill sets. My skill set is fairly narrow, and I'm just trying to do the best I can within that niche. So I think that's our role on some level, to do like fact checking, on another level to promote, the best evidence-based information we can and get that out there. The thing is the social learning aspect, like where people get their information from, where they develop their belief systems, where they develop their value systems, that all like filters together to how people interpret information, period. Right. So if we're looking for like a solution to how do you deal with misinformation, it's not just fact checking. It's not just removing disinformation from the field. You have to inoculate people early, not only with scientific literacy skills, right, but also their like value system and their belief systems. So that way, if they're like combing through an article or whatever, or an Instagram post, or watching a YouTube video, they're like, all right, well, what's this person's expertise?
Yeah,
that's question one, right? Like,
where's it coming from?
Yeah, where's it coming from? What's their expertise? And then sort of this intrinsic, introspection, rather, like, what are my emotions when I read this, or when I view this, or when I take this in? Am I getting mad? Like, what are my emotional ties to this belief system or this worldview? And then the third part, again, kind of goes back to the scientific literacy, that is this an area of uncertainty? If so, it is okay to have differing views based on that uncertainty. But that also needs to be tempered with the confidence, which kind of goes back to like, how much science, acumen do you have? Because real scientists are like
Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah. And I mean, think early on with the vaccines, right? We didn't know. When I say we didn't know it, it's not that we didn't know anything, but it's like, we didn't know where we'd be in 2 years. We had
definitely didn't know we'd even have a vaccine available, in the rapid, rate. Like, it was fast, like a lot of people's fears with COVID specifically, like, oh, well, it's fast. And like, it was in terms of the turnaround for this specific version of the mRNA.
Yeah.
But like,
compared to what we've done before, yes. But then also when you look at all the resources thrown at this thing and all the people working on it, you're like, I could see that. Just given
every scientist in the world, every country, all the resources that we have, because like everything's shut down. It wasn't wasn't like, oh yeah, hey, hopefully some guys can figure this out. It's like that was the only thing that people were doing for a year straight.
Yeah, previously the MMR vaccine, took like a little over 4 years to kind of make. And then in this particular situation, you had unlimited resources, both financially, professionally, and this huge international, collaboration to come up with all of these potential candidates for vaccines. And we found some stuff. So yeah, we didn't know that we were going to have a vaccine that was going to be viable. When the vaccine was released, we had pretty good data that it was safe and effective at the time. We didn't know about the mutation rate, and how this was going to transpire over time. We didn't know about the vaccine hesitancy, what the effects that was going to have. There's just a lot of stuff that maybe we didn't know confidently because there wasn't enough time to collect all the data. But then as more and more data has emerged, we were like, man, it'd been cool if we could have gotten more people on board. So anyway, that understanding that uncertainty doesn't mean that it's bad. That's just the scientific literacy thing. This early inoculation, fact checking can be useful. People's introspection on their emotion, and then just creating a more kind of reversing a lot of the societal norms of like distrust. So we're like, because that right there goes into people's values and worldviews and stuff like that, and it's really difficult to get people out of that and even have a conversation, right? Because people, when they say they're just asking questions or just trying to have a conversation, they're not really. It's a kind of like a false actor kind of thing. They're just, they want to get information that fits their narrative, but they are not actually open to discussing the evidence.
And they might not even know how to discuss it either, right?
Yeah, that's the other thing.
They're so illiterate with the science. It's like, even if you so this is a concept that I learned, ironically, from a YouTube video. Have you heard of the guys like the alt-right playbook on YouTube?
I have not, which is actually a sidebar. Most people curate their social media, or at least like social media interaction, in a way where it's like, these people fit my narrative, my worldview, my value system. And so, we're all guilty of that. I'm like, I can't be aware of this stuff because my head's going to actually explode. And also for people listening to this, I swear to you, we're going to get to exercise. We're going to talk about it.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
I promise.
We got really excited about this. Yeah. But the concept of like, what's the solution for potential misinformation? One of the issues with it is that all the things you mentioned, people are more or less going to find information that's in alignment with their views. But then the other side is that there are people that are aware of their ignorance, and they're almost using that. They don't want to play your game,
right?
Because they have a bigger incentive for the narrative. It's not just, this is what I think, but it's also, I think this, it's probably not correct. And because it's what I think, and I can get everyone else to think this way, and I'm profiting off of that, or I'm leveraging an audience off of that, it's even harder now for me to back down. And I actually just don't want to.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a playbook of like the alt-right, because it's like, take some concept that's really like polarizing, scream it, and then the person that's like trying to be the scientist, or more level-headed, will show them the facts about why they're wrong, and they're like, I don't care. It's not an effective strategy.
Yeah. You can't agree. It's very difficult to have an open, honest discussion, an evidence-based discussion, when one or more of the parties are not going to agree on what scientific evidence actually is and the implications of that, right? People are like, yeah, well, I don't trust science. You're like, okay, well, I'm not really sure where we go from here. It's like saying you don't trust physics. It's like, well, we have to have an agreed upon set of like rational rules that we're all going to like agree upon and use to actually have this discussion. And if not, it's difficult to even have a conversation.
I actually have a really good pivot point for us to get an exercise on that.
Oh, good. Yeah, let's do it.
So you talk about like kind of fundamentals of like where we can base our understanding from. I was watching this video that was critiquing a podcast that you had with Lane Norton, apparently, where he was talking about like his back injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that within lifting we talk a lot about with like squat, bench, and deadlift is like, there's these fundamentals of the squat, bench, and deadlift that we have to follow before we move on, or before we try to figure out what's best for a lifter. And whether or not like you agree with like the idea of like fundamentals of lifting.
Sure.
Like to me, the fundamentals that I can kind of understand is that like the goal of any given lift is, one, to produce as much force into the bar as you can, transferring the force from each muscle into the bar as effectively as you can. And then 2, utilizing, your own biomechanics to make that happen. And that there might be some of these things like bracing and breathing that could help to, increase that transference of energy from one part of the body to another. And that likely will, at minimum, increase efficiency for some lifters. But then so one example is the deadlift. I was discussing how valuable it is to create tension, like make the bar like float off the ground before you even pull.
Sure. Pull the slack out of the bar.
Yeah. Pull slack out of the bar. I'm like, all right, everyone does that, right? Everyone pulls slack out of the bar. And so I went to go on YouTube and I was looking up Taylor Atwood and his deadlift, at least from, I think it was nationals this year. And he doesn't pull slack out of the bar until he does it late.
Mm-hmm.
So he creates all the tension that he needs in his body, but then he exerts it into the bar all at once. You know what I mean? So you, for example, you pull the slack out first, and then you use that leverage to pop the bar off the ground.
Sure. And
then Taylor Atwood kind of does all the things that you would otherwise do, but he doesn't transfer into the bar until the last second. And I was just like, wow, there's a top level lifter that's just not applying this thing that I thought literally everyone did, and I mean, and I'm understanding of that, right? And I think that's really interesting that for some reason, the way in which he was performing the deadlift countered, for example, David Wilson, who's got the American deadlift record in the 93s, I think, or 105s, and he was doing it like textbook, but like Taylor Atwood's one of the strongest lifters in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I mean, just as a nomenclature or like, because words are important or whatever. When I think about fundamentals, I'm thinking like, well, if you don't do these things, badness is going to occur. And, not everybody may perceive it that way. So I'm definitely open to my own biases being there. I think when we're talking about maximal lifting efficiency, particularly from a performance standpoint, performance either being lift the most weight possible and potentially with a second goal of like stimulate the desired muscle groups to the maximum amount that you can, right? So like if you're doing the deadlifts, not that we would do this or I wouldn't, if you're doing the deadlift for lumbar erector spinae development and you're letting your low back just full on round, it's probably not the greatest exercise for that. The counter argument is, well, if you're going through a concentric and then eccentric, or eccentric then concentric lumbar movement under load, maybe that is better than isometric. But anyway, the whole point is like if you're doing an exercise in a manner that doesn't maximally stimulate it, then maybe that technique isn't great from a hypertrophy standpoint. If there are opportunities to improve your technique, right, to improve lifting efficiency, so max weight on the bar from a strength standpoint, then there are likely a number of things that most successful lifters do, and you could call those fundamentals. I'd be on board with saying that, but within those pillars or fundamentals or sort of core, ideas about movement strategy, there's going to be a range of variance there where people's different styles and leverages and anthropometry and how they learn the lift, how they prefer to do the lift, and all this other stuff sort of makes things look much different. Sometimes even the equipment does that too. Like Kaler Woolham, that dude yanks the bar, but it's a deadlift bar. And you're like, well, maybe, he's creating an impulse there and that's helpful. Like, you can time the whip together. I don't know. I don't deadlift 900 pounds. I'm not saying I can't ever comment on his deadlift technique, right? Or just analyze it, but I'm just saying like, I don't know why he does that. And the most interesting part of all of that, like when you ask athletes, why do they do certain things? They are very, very good at creating reasons, right? But in general, the insight to those reasons is inaccurate. You ask if you ever read The Sports Gene from Epstein. Not that Epstein, but the Epstein.
I've heard of the book. I haven't read it.
Yeah, he was a journalist for ProPublica and ESPN and the sport. What was the sports magazine? Sports Illustrated. I don't think that's still in print, but anyway, he wrote The Sports Gene and then also Range. Anyway, they were asking baseball players like, "Oh, where do you look when the ball gets delivered? The pitcher delivers the ball," and they're like, "Oh, I'm looking for this, that, and the other." And it's like, yeah, the actual visual processing speed of even a well-developed high-level athlete is not fast enough for that to happen. So you're not doing that, even though you think these are the reasons why I'm doing these things. So yeah, I think again, I'd be in agreement with calling these certain ideas we have about movement strategies for these fairly constrained lifts, squat, bench, deadlift, like a handful of things that most people do that are successful, call them fundamentals, sure. But within that, there's just going to be a range of variance, right? And I think a big problem here is that people have a very difficult time at relating to others who have experiences that are different than their own lived experiences. So for example, if you were like, you got to pull slack out of the bar, right? You got to do it, got to create all this tension. And then you were coaching a lifter who had great success not doing that. You'd be like, this doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know. Rather than being like, well, it's just a different way to do it. You're getting to the same point. Carry on.
Yeah.
And so again, and I think people will make up reasons on the back end of that for like the different way of doing it is suboptimal or could potentially be better. Like, oh, injury risk, or you're gonna get worse.
That's the one I've never understood, because it's like I get why people want to avoid injury.
Sure.
But I don't understand why people are so confident what causes injury.
I mean, I don't know either. I mean, even very, very smart people I respect in the field, I'm like, why are you so confident in this? I mean, I try when I'm talking to people, particularly folks that I respect and that have all the have the resume that makes me really think that they're experts in the subject matter. I tend to start out with the assumption that they know more about this than I do, except for injury in general, because I'm like, well, this is kind of my thing,
Yeah.
Not that I'm oft injured, but I'm thinking, if we have a similar knowledge base on this, that's great. So let's just discuss and see if we can both learn something. That's great. But yeah, people that I think I respect a lot in the industry, when they will confidently weigh in on things that increase injury risk or are certainly going to lead to injuries, and then how you can prevent them. And I'm like, you're sure? Because I'm not, and I feel like only one of us is actually familiar with the literature on this, and the rehabilitative process, particularly as it relates to evidence and this, that, and the other. And so, yeah, I don't know why people go that way, other than to explain their own experience.
Yeah.
And
I'm way more comfortable with saying, hey, this might help improve your efficiency with your lift. But I've never, even when I was young and I just got into it, it's first of all, I don't want to make someone even if I'm right, even if the thing I'm saying would reduce injury risk, right? I don't want them to think, if you don't do what I tell you, you're going to get hurt.
I mean,
you know what I mean? That's number one.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. When I say biggest thing, I mean probably the most important factor for if you're a fitness professional in this space, and you were looking for one thing to improve your practice or your presence on social media. It's don't create these harmful narratives for folks unless they need to be there. And if they don't need to be there, you're doing more harm than good, right? So, I mean, I was just cruising the Explore page the other day, right? And then there's the red X, green checkbox deadlift, and it's why do you sometimes get low back pain during deadlifts? And it's all of these things, hips starting too low, your back not being set, and it's
and why are they always chiropractors?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean that's your money maker, right? They're gonna it's not gonna be podiatrists, right? They're gonna tell you they're gonna talk about your foot angle or dorsiflexion or something.
I was at a friend's house for the 4th, and one of my friends was talking about how they get knee pain in their squat. He doesn't follow me. He doesn't follow the fitness industry. And I was like, well, how often do you try? And he's like, well, not really ever. And I was like, well, it may be that, you're trying to squat more load than you've ever squatted in the last 5 months. And, the sensitivity in that area is high. And so you're experiencing pain as maybe a signal that, hey, maybe we got to pull back a little bit, and he's like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, how about we do a bodyweight squat? Do you feel pain in the bodyweight squat? And he's like, no, it actually feels good. I'm like, yeah. So, hey, maybe the squat itself isn't the problem. And then out of nowhere, someone that's been drinking, it's you got to come and see me. You got to come and see me twice a week. And I'm like, what do you do? She's like, I'm a chiropractor. I own my chiropractic facility. If you want to reduce your pain on squat, you got to just come in 2 adjustments a week. You're good. And I'm just it was hard because I knew that I couldn't tell her, hey, your entire job experience should be, discredited. And you should leave the industry. It's not helpful, because that's what if I was right in my synopsis, she has no job. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can't. Yeah, it's very difficult to again have these discussions with people whose salaries depend on certain belief systems. But that it's interesting that you say, oh, that you wouldn't have a job, and it's sure, chiropractors are excellent primary care and musculoskeletal experts. There's certainly a role for them, particularly with patient education, activity modification, etc. Is probably don't need to be adjusting folks, right? And then
that's a fair point.
Yeah, and then creating these narratives oh, you got to move a certain way. It's let's be movement optimists, right? And not try to overstep what the evidence tells us. And even when there is no evidence, you can't just rely on your experience like it's an unbiased thing. And that's the other thing. People are like, oh, well, what if there is no evidence? Then what? It's well, your experience is worthwhile, hypothesis generating ideas. Those are useful, but it's you can't be too confident in those things until well-controlled evidence is available. And people are like, we use evidence for everything. I'm like, we literally use evidence one way or another for every one of our decisions. And I don't say we like Barbell Medicine. I mean the human population.
Like humans. Yeah.
Yes. When for example, you wake up in the morning, you look outside, it's raining. You're like, looks like it's raining. I'm going to bring an umbrella. That is an evidence-based decision. Okay. Or you check the weather app. I mean, whatever. So
you either wait on the percentage of the, precipitation chance in your area and bring an umbrella, or you go outside and it's raining and you go back and get your umbrella.
Yeah, you figured it out. Right.
Yeah.
You just made an evidence-based decision.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting when you have this guy, you had the guy with the knee pain, and then you just had him go to a lower threat, lower load sort of movement pattern. He was able to tolerate it just fine. The analogy I like to use for this is this gluten sensitivity thing that pops up, has been popping up certainly more and more frequently over the last decade. Usually it's a volume related thing, volume of gluten. So for example, if someone's like, I'm sensitive to gluten, it's like, okay, well, let's try the old 1 bite challenge. 1 bite, everybody knows the rules. It's like a take off the bar stool thing. It's like try one bite of bread. And if you had a significant gluten allergy or gluten insensitivity, you will become symptomatic from this 1 bite of bread. That's not a clinical diagnostic tool. All right, we do things a little bit better, a little bit more legitimately in the clinic. But when you start going down the rabbit hole of like, okay, well, when do you get this? And it's like, well, it's usually when I have like a whole pizza. Like, yeah, it's a volume related thing, right? And so for this individual, it wasn't that they couldn't squat at all without pain. It was that they couldn't squat at a circummaximal weight, given their preparation for that task. But if you can't squat at all, if you can't squat at all,
Tyson does that with
it's very difficult for you to live. Yeah. Oh, wait, the gluten thing, the bread thing, or the squat?
No, because Tyson's population typically is like people who haven't lifted before, or like are just more recent with lifting. And so I find his, like you were telling me, like kind of a protocol that you take, Tyson, with like getting someone into squatting from never before. For me, I'm only working with lifters who are like, yo man, give me all the volume. I want to be the best lifter ever. Whereas I think your population's a bit different.
Yeah, no, I feel like I work, 90% of the people I work with have either never exercised before, or it's like stuff they did in high school or sports as kids. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I get to stand on the shoulders of all the information that I've gotten, especially, from Barbell Medicine, like, 3-4 years, starting 3-4 years ago.
Let's go.
Like, I think before I get to the squat progression, just the general thing that I'm so glad I have is I can say so much with like a certain degree of confidence based on available literature. I mean, if I can even understand it, like there's realms of confidence that I appreciate that I at least less and less often step outside my scope. But yeah, I mean, it's just finding a variation of basic movements that there isn't a perceived threat, and they feel, because when I'm working with people, I try to set it up so that they're doing solo days as soon as possible, like with movements that they feel confident that they can load in, and they don't, that they feel competent and confident in. And so,
sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I can find some variation, some range of motion, some load that they feel pretty okay with, because if they're sitting down and standing up in a chair, they're already squatting. So
yeah, that's the whole thing, right? So if you can't squat, and squat is this intentionally vague umbrella term, right? It's simultaneous ground-based hip, knee, and ankle flexion with or without a load to some depth. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You get to create all of these like specifics as you go, but you're dealing with a different sort of barrier, right? So your barrier is like, well, I heard that if I squat, I'm gonna hurt my knees, or if I deadlift, I'm gonna hurt my back. Whereas typically with people who've been lifting for a while, we're dealing with the actual experience of the knee pain, the back pain, or whatever, and sometimes, plus or minus, well, I read, or I saw on Instagram, or I saw on YouTube this, like, what are your thoughts? So sometimes we get, tag teamed with both like the social learning thing and the lived experience. But the majority of new lifters, they don't have that lived experience yet. And I don't think that's necessarily easier or harder. I just think it's different, right? So yeah, when we work with new lifters, it's a very similar approach. It's like, we know that we want you to work all the major muscle groups of the body through a fairly large range of motion at an intensity that's somewhat uncomfortable. The rep range, the absolute load on the bar, the actual specifics of the movement are all going to shake themselves out. So how do we get to that like specific prescription? Well, the individual is heavily involved in that process. So what can you do? What do you want to do? What do you have access to do? Right. And then like, how do we put that together in a way that we think is best going to suit your needs? So I don't think that everybody needs to squat, for example, right? You're like, you're barbell medicine, that means you got to train with barbells. I'm like, well, when we were writing this article for Up to Date's like, I always call it the doctor's Google. It's like you go to a doctor's office and you have almost any, medical issue, they're going to reference Up to Date and be like, what's the latest treatment on this? What do the guidelines say, et cetera? So we wrote the article on strength training in primary care and like strength training prescription in primary care. We came up with a full on machine-based exercise program. Is that my personal favorite program? No. But if we were talking about promoting health promotion and getting a greater uptake, we're going to need different variations. It's not just barbell training, machine-based training. We're going to need body weight stuff, just basically, if you can dream it, we're going to need it to meet people where they're at. But yeah, I think it's just, you're getting different obstacles, different barriers. So yeah, these absolutes that we see in the fitness industry and very confident claims, particularly surrounding injury risk reduction. Oh man, it hurts my soul. It hurts my soul, not only because like, I'm like, think of what you're doing to your audience, but also like, this isn't because there's no information out there. It does make it harder for everyone. And there's information out there. How do I know this? Because I published it. It's like, bro, literally you could just Google like, whatever your search terms, and you're gonna come to our website or somebody else's website similar. And so it's like, just take that extra second before you click post. Say, is this in my audience's best interest? And like, if you don't know, it's probably not. Oh yeah. Well, the fitness industry is the Wild West. What scope of practice? If you're a fitness professional, you're like, cool. So I'm a nutrition professional. I'm a biomechanics expert. I'm a, programming whiz. I'm a behavior change specialist. I'm a psychologist. Yeah. Oh, also I'm a finance expert because I have my own business now. And it's like the odds of one person having expertise in all of those things, it is unlikely. Just like it's unlikely that a physician who is, board certified internal medicine is going to have expertise in, 20 different specialties. They may know a little bit, enough to get them started. But if you have a zebra, so it's like when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. But when you have a zebra, you're going to have to refer to the specialist. Just like when you're trying to get your LLC or S Corp or whatever to the next level, like probably, seek the help of a professional who has expertise in your specific business domain. So anyway, I just think if you're on the fence, like, is this useful or not? It's probably not. It's probably
and
not.
Also, like, so I was talking to you on Instagram about this, but like one of the things that I find the most troubling about the last 2 years is just that there is so much profit in the misinformation itself.
Sure.
And like in every regard, but it's almost like, I mean, you're a little older than both of us, but when the fitness industry was booming, early days, like online businesses and stuff, like 2013, 2012, I don't know how much older it goes back before then when online businesses were like a thing. There was a lot of profit in that misinformation from like a courses perspective. You had the clean eating, wave, and then you had all these coaches that were going to prescribe like clean eating protocols for bodybuilders because they can't eat certain foods because it's going to make them fat. And like I started dating my ex-girlfriend, and her coach was telling her that she needed a fat load on certain days while she was doing her glutes so that the fat would go to her glutes, and she's paying them like, and it's like kind of like harmless, like it actually is harmful, right? But it's not so widespread that everyone's like, this is a problem with, misinformation online. And then in the fitness industry, like you said, there's no real regulation on anything. Like there's no regulation in the supplement world. I mean, there is kind of, but not really, because the FDA doesn't have to approve it unless it gets reported, and then they do, and then within coaching, it's like literally anyone can be a coach. And that's not to say that they all suck or something, but that the amount of people who see this as an opportunity to grab money is a lot higher. And so the ethical standard is also a lot lower, the wider you spread the net.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I don't want to make it sound like I'm in favor of more regulation, because I don't know that I am. And I don't know that fixes the problem, right? Like, if you have this, national board that you have to, take and sit for and renew, that means that you're a fitness professional and high, is living up to the standard. I don't know that it helps, but I do agree that there are financial incentives for people to promote and spread ideas that are not based in evidence. And again, I think that goes back to this sort of social anti-intellectualism, post-truth, whatever kind of thing. And then also, again, the scientific illiteracy of a lot of people. Because if it sounds plausible and nobody's like checking, for that, it's like, oh, all right, well, that seems to be the case, particularly if the person looks the part or has some credential that seems legit or has previously done things that are impressive. So like you could be a performer, like high level athlete. You could be somebody who's very, very attractive, or you could be somebody with a lot of letters after your name. I chose the latter because that's all that was available to me. But, and you're hoping that people do the right thing, and act ethically. But because professionalism in this industry is relatively low, I think you get you get to where we're at. So, well, what do you do about it?
One of the things.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you're fine. It's all good.
So one of the things that you mentioned, why I wanted to have you on is because, one, you're great and I like what you have to say. But two is that COVID has now reared its head into every aspect of the lifting world.
Sure.
I think it was unexpected for me. I wasn't aware of how many people in the lifting industry would be, so actively anti-science when it comes to shit they quite literally don't know anything about, like vaccines or, efficacy of masks. And then, you have companies that are also subtly sharing their, their opinions about, what's the best thing to prevent COVID, and, we saw that post. I think Alico posted it. It was strength reduces symptomatic COVID-19. I don't want to misrepresent them.
No, so they say strength decreases the recovery time from COVID-19. The idea being if you undertook a strength, the underlying premise of that statement, right? If you just take it at face value, is that getting stronger reduces the recovery time from COVID-19, which is not what the study said. That's not what the study looked at. Basically, people with higher levels of strength versus lower levels of strength, and then if they got COVID, what was their recovery process like? And people who are in the highest, I think it was quartile. It may have been a tertile, and not to lose anybody with their eyes glazing over. Quartiles when you separate a data set into 4. Tertiles when you separate it into 3. I don't know why it's tertiles, not third tiles, but whatever. Tertiles. In any case, the stronger people tended to have shorter recovery times. It wasn't by a long period of time. It was relatively modest. But that doesn't say that, you should just start strength training to, when you get COVID and it's going to reduce your recovery time. Basically what's saying is if you're healthier going in, as evidenced by the fact that you have more strength, you're going to be better. And that's not unique. We see that in many different data sets that end up getting translated into public health messaging by non-experts that can potentially be harmful. You see it with vitamin D, for example. It's vitamin D, higher levels of vitamin D decrease the recovery time from COVID-19, which is true. But then people translate that in that they need to take supplemental vitamin D. And really, serum vitamin D levels are a proxy, a surrogate measure for health. meaning that if you are healthy without disease, regardless really of your sun exposure, your vitamin D levels will be normal. If you have a disease process, your vitamin D levels will be lower. And so it's like, yeah, if you were healthier going in, you have a higher likelihood of being healthier going out. And it's like you're likely to recover better. But taking supplemental vitamin D does nothing. So like the way it's explained, right, is important. And people want these little sound bites or whatever. And especially if you're making, strength training equipment, yeah, you want people to like believe that strength training is going to reduce their recovery time. And if you put a gun to my head and you said, Feigenbaum, are you saying that you don't think that more people should strength train? I'm not saying that. I want more people to strength train. It's barbell medicine, for Christ's sake. Like that's what we're here for. But as far as a like public health intervention to address the pandemic, that's not going to fly for multiple reasons. One, if you look at the small number of people who have access to gyms, and that's not just like geographically, that's also financially, that's also free time, that's also just the education level, all these sort of things that tie in, right? You're not going to get up to a large enough cohort of the population that's going to be able to strength train. Also, they need to be strong before they get COVID, not like
during.
Wow. Yeah, that's not.
You got COVID? Yo, come to my home gym. We'll get you jacked, and you'll.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, but if you're asking, do I want more people to engage in regular resistance training, regular conditioning work, eat a health promoting dietary pattern, and do I think that would overall increase the health and health trajectory of individuals? Well, of course it would. Course it would. But it's not an either or kind of thing. Why either when you can and do that and get the vaccine? All right, like and mitigate other health promoting actions like age appropriate medical screening, for example. It's basically it's a lie of omission here. And their next post, similar thing. Strength training promotes fat loss, right?
Yeah,
and their whole caption is about these myokines, which are hormones released from the muscle, and like how it has these effects intracellularly on certain like fat burning machinery. By the way, this study was from a mouse study, and this is what's known as a mechanistic study. It's effectively you get a mechanism out the other end. You don't get clinical data like, oh yeah, humans who strength train regularly lose fat. The best data we have on exercise, all exercise, including resistance training, is that it doesn't help folks lose weight. On average, people's body composition improves slightly because they gain lean body mass, particularly if they stick with it. Loss of fat mass, it's not as clear. So if someone was like strength training promotes fat loss in humans long term, I'd be like, I want that to be true, but that's not really what the data says. Exercise in general is great for preventing weight regain, improving body composition long term, provided it's accompanied with some sort of dietary pattern change, and increases the sensitivity of satiety signals, so that's feelings of fullness after you eat. In addition to other things, your metabolism doesn't tend to slow down as much when you lose weight. Your metabolism slows down not because you're restricting calories, but because you're losing body mass. So you lost body mass, so you require less energy to sustain yourself. Metabolism slows down. People are like, my metabolism slowed down. It's like, well, yeah, you weigh less. It's not any slower per kilo. That only happens very, very short term during periods of weight loss, but then it goes back to normal.
Back.
Yeah. And interestingly, if it did stay down, so we learned this from the Biggest Loser study, those who had the largest decrease in metabolism lost the most weight. So it's like, anyway, there's just layers of lies. It's like a lie onion, right? You just keep peeling it back. You're like, damn it, why you do this?
And they're actively not communicating the nuance.
Well, of course not.
It doesn't benefit them to explain it.
Right. It's so strange to me. Like as a business owner, I'm like, bro, you could just post a picture of your barbell and that's going to get 10,000 likes because it's sexy. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. And don't make it appear scientific by linking a mechanistic study.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go in too hard on these people because I don't know who's posting it, and like they're not doing it on purpose. Nobody's doing this like a nefarious intent, I think. Yeah,
and they're like overall, I would say overall, they make most posts about their equipment. It's just kind of like recently, right? It's like the recent the surge of like let's talk about COVID and let's talk about something, again, out of our practice of understanding.
Yeah, let's not.
And it's going to do well because everyone's going to comment on it. So it doesn't matter if it's negative or, not, or positive. We have now 20,000 new people on our fucking website.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, it's Finelli's. So there's a couple principles about the spread of like misinformation, particularly polarizing topics. One is Brandolini's principle. And it's basically that misinformation takes less work to create than clean up. So like you can just say stuff and that doesn't take much work, but then to like address all of that. I mean, just think about it. Their thing was that strength training promotes fat loss. And I'm like, well, there's all this other stuff. It's like,
yeah.
And I didn't reach nearly as many people. No offense to your podcast. It will. I believe in you.
It will.
Yeah. And then there's a secondary principle called Finelli's principle. It takes less intelligence to create misinformation than to clean up. So you could literally say whatever you want, right? Particularly if you have a social media account, Wi-Fi, or some sort of internet access, whatever. And then for people to clean it up, Herculean efforts need to take place. It's just, there's this Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Secretary of State, Cordell Hill, has this famous quote that I love. It's like, a lie will gallop halfway around the world before the truth has time to pull its britches on. Think about it. Liver King posts something, right? And then it's like, okay, how many experts do you have to get to weigh in on this? And like, how many times do they have to say it before an equivalent level of impact has happened, if ever? That maybe not. That's what we're dealing with. So it's like, what do? You just give up? Austin and I message each other regularly. We're like, oh, I think I quit the internet today.
I was telling that to Tyson. Like, I try to avoid social media, like I can't. It's not actually like I can avoid it, but I've also been medicated recently to help with my anxiety related to it too, because I was like not able to function for a certain amount of time without just spending 3 hours of my day trying to convince somebody that the reason that Jordan Peterson is famous is because he's as vague as the Bible is. And, that's a hard thing to discuss with someone that's like, life is, rooted to Christianity.
Right. Did you ever read Tom Nichols' book, The Death of Expertise?
I have only read a few pages. That's how I am. I read a few pages. And I'm like, I like this book. I'll recommend it to someone else who will have the time to read it.
Yeah, you got to do it. And particularly for this one passage in there, I'm recalling this from memory. He's like, so how do you determine if someone is an actual expert, right? There are a handful of criteria. Do they have like a formal, pedigree that you could refer to? Like, what does their CV look like, right? Do people, and so you're like, Jordan Peterson? Okay, he's got that, sure, right? And then it's like, do his colleagues or do the person's colleagues like hold them in high regard? So in other words, like, are other researchers, clinicians, professionals generally like, yeah, that makes sense and good job? And in that case, no, hard no. And so you either have to believe that you have this one person is giving you the real deal, right? And everyone else is wrong, right? Because they're in on it, because it's conspiracy. Yeah. They don't know what the conspiracy is because quite literally the topics range across everything.
Yeah.
Or is it possible that Jordan Peterson is actually full of shit? To the extent post-truth syndrome. Yeah, to the extent that you can actually figure out what the hell he's talking about. I think that's the thing.
Liberal neo-Marxism, I think, or whatever.
Oh my God. Yeah. So it's like, does the person have the pedigree? Do their colleagues hold them in high regard? And then over time, how does that transfer? Like, how does that translate? Because you have people initially, Linus Pauling, for example. Linus Pauling, he discovered something to do with DNA, another thing to do with quantum physics. He's the only person to receive 2 Nobel Prizes in separate fields that wasn't a peace prize, right? So like, chemist, super smart. Whoa, this dude, big brain energy. Then out of nowhere, he gets off on this vitamin C kick. Like, everybody needs to take vitamin C, and not just a little vitamin C, a high dose of vitamin C. And it's like, well, okay, does he have the pedigree? Well, chemist. All right. Do his peers hold him in high regard? Well, they did, but now with this vitamin C stuff, particularly after study after study after study after study after study showed that taking supplemental vitamin C, particularly at high doses, did not do anything positive and had a significant risk significant risk of adverse effects. And so this just changes over time. And it's like, you're going to have to keep reevaluating where you're getting your information from unless you are an expert in that field. And if you're an expert in the field, you can make up your own mind. You don't need to listen to me.
Yeah. It's like there's no reason to listen to just one person. I find the thing that pisses me off is I'll listen to one person about something that I'm really interested, whether it's like camera stuff or if it's lifting, and they'll be digging on that, you know? And then one video or one episode, one podcast, they're like, anyway, I've been only eating meat, you know, for the last 5 weeks, and like, you know, my
Come on,
my immune system is so good now. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Why did you have to do that? Like, I liked you.
You just ruined it.
I loved it. You just ruined this for me. And now I don't know, you know, what your incentives are within the thing that I thought you were an expert in. You know, if it's like tech or whatever. It's like if Linus, you know, from Linus Tech Tips is just like, you know what, guys, strength training reduces fat loss. You know, it's like, wait, what?
Why do you say that? I mean, I like the I like the message. Yeah. So yeah, there's two things here. So one is like this like cross sector, cross field. I don't know. Like you're everyone's a polymath, right? Just like I'm smart at everything, right? I'm smart at one thing. I'm smart in this other thing too, probably.
Yeah.
And I guess Linus Pauling had been right for so long. You know, the idea that he was wrong this time seems, probably didn't even occur to him.
And you got a lot of people that trust him on, you know, he's leading the charge in scientific literacy. And then he's like, was he profiting off of this or something? Did he create like a
supplement line? And then it's so funny because he actually ended up losing a lot of the money because he kept funding research that kept coming back negative. It like experts across fields, like having expertise across fields. Yeah, again, it's like if you are a bona fide expert in one field, you may perceive some unwarranted expertise across other fields. That is certainly a possibility. And again, Linus Pauling, like he's right in my brain, saying that's what happened to me.
Yeah,
from the grave. R.I.P.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, he's dead.
Yeah, but it has been my experience that people with actual expertise, particularly high levels of expertise in their field, are very aware of where their expertise ends. And in general, when asked about things outside of their scope, they hem and haw and project and kind of push it away. They're like, I don't know, or I'm not sure. And in general, that makes people upset because they're like, but I trust you, so I want to know what you have to say. And it's like, yeah, but I don't have enough training in this particular topic, experience in this particular topic, or the we don't have the correct relationship for me to actually tell you, for example, what to do medically, because am I going to be held responsible? Like I need to have more information, just all sorts of things, right? They just know acutely like where the line is for them to transfer information from. And those are the people that I like to seek out because I'm like, yeah, this person gets it. I can understand that they tend to be less popular because, again, people want their guru and they want entertainment and they want information across a wide variety of subjects. But in general, actual experts are like pretty narrowly focused on their area of expertise by definition. So, yeah, I think if you have a person who claims expertise across a wide variety of different subjects, particularly very deep levels of expertise, that is a red flag. That is a red flag. So for myself as an example, people are like, yeah, what about you, Feigenbaum? You're like strength training, primary care, public health guy. I'm like, well, I mean, that is my level of training, right? I have formal primary care training, public health training, and I've been in the strength conditioning field for 15 plus years, in addition to multiple credentials suggesting that to be the case and expertise in that field. So, but if you ask me, for example, about what should I do to get ready for the Crash Bees, which is this rowing competition held in the Northeast every year, I'd be like, I know generally like how I would get somebody ready for rowing, but I am not an expert in rowing, either in technique or programming for it or whatever, and I would refer you to somewhere else. And that's even within like the quote unquote strength conditioning or fitness field, right? if you go even further, like people ask me business questions all the time. And I'm like, I mean, I have a business. I even have an MBA now.
Do you really?
I just finished my MBA. Yeah. Yeah. So now I'm master, doctor, master. So it only makes sense. I need to get another doctorate to like balance it out. It's a
Just keep going to school so that you can actually be the polymath that you
Yeah.
always hated.
Yeah, that I've always hated. Right. That one weird trick. Yeah. But I all the time, I'm like, if you're not in the fitness industry doing like online coaching, I don't know that I have a lot of insight here. And the insight that I do have is mostly experience, not necessarily actual expertise. So again, I'm very skeptical of my own skill set and knowledge base, and I know where my skill set ends. And I think that, again, those are the experts that I like to seek out.
Remember when LeBron James was like squatting, like half squatting in his gym, and everyone was like freaking out about it and talking about how they would fire his strength coach and stuff?
Yeah.
Like on one hand, I think it feels good to be like, yeah, the guy knows nothing. He should be squatting full range of motion. But on the other hand, I think about this with my lifters as well when it comes to the other side of the picture. Like what could have happened in a different scenario, whether it's like, hey, at the meet, I'm going to have you jump 10 kilos from second to third versus 20 because I want you to nail the attempt. I don't want you to miss it, and I definitely don't want you to get hurt. I don't know how I feel about it with like someone like LeBron James, but the consequence of like somehow LeBron James getting hurt, I imagine makes all the things we're talking about even more difficult. Like as his trainer, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
And what LeBron James knows about like pain and injury, it probably, there's so much more that one person's trying to manage. And then he's also, 39 years old trying to stay in the field, and it doesn't want to get, the injury actually has a very real direct impact on his livelihood. I mean, kind of,
I don't feel optimistic for that strength conditioning coach's long-term career prospects.
Yeah.
And not because they're bad at their job, but rather because invariably injuries are going to happen, and they're going to happen to a marquee player, and that's going to reflect poorly on you, or the team's going to do poorly unrelated to your preparation, and that's going to, you're going to get fired. But I think that's just part and parcel in the strength conditioning field. I mean, I used to, back in the day when I was more impressionable, I would go to these strength and speed conferences for the NSCA. I would just go to, and you actually meet people who work at D1 colleges and with professional athletes or whatever. The turnover is quite high regularly. So again, if they have a losing season, it doesn't look good for you. Or if one of their athletes get injured. And so it's like, when people are like, oh, would you want to work for, one of these professional teams? I'm like, no. So one, I'd be taking a pay cut. I don't want that. Two, you imagine the pressure that I don't really have control over, because I could do a program, work with these people at a very close level with the best of intentions. And, sometimes it just do be like that.
Yeah.
But trying to explain that to like the brass, you can't. And even further, you could translate this to Gen Pop. They're like, well, I want to do everything possible to not get injured. And you're like, cool, I'm on board with that. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, so what should I do? I'm like, okay, great. You should use an auto-regulated approach for your strength conditioning efforts. You should gradually increase training load over time to build work capacity and training tolerance. You should sleep both an appropriate amount and make sure it's high quality sleep to the extent that you can control that. You should eat a health promoting diet. And other than that, luck of the draw. I feel like, I noticed you didn't say technique in there. I'm like, yeah, I didn't, because I don't think it's really a model. It's not really a lever we can pull to actually reduce. Yeah, and to reduce risk, right? So if you're talking about techniques, for example, that do verifiably increase your risk of injury, we're talking about uncontrolled contractions performed at high velocities. So accidents in general, right? So like you lost your balance and fell and smashed your face, or you dropped a weight on your foot, or failure of equipment. None of these things you can really control. It's not, if I tell you, don't lose your balance when you're squatting, you're like, yeah, no, I got that. But like, what else?
This reminded me of a question. remember EPC when all
Oh,
the
boy.
coaches were kind of grilling you about like in competition, like injury risk potentially be increasing at like powerlifting competitions,
Sure.
and how that might be. I think their argument was that that may be a reason to like prioritize like some level. I don't know what specifically what argument they were making regarding technique, but it seemed like there was some level of like, well, injury risk is higher at competitions, and I don't remember what the
Sure.
rest of it was.
Yeah, I don't know that injury risk is actually higher in competitions. The data we have on this is not terribly clear. So there's one Olympic weightlifting study where they studied Olympic weightlifters while they were at the Olympic, they were at the Olympics. So they were training for 2 weeks while living in Olympic Village. And they didn't differentiate between like injuries on the platform versus injuries in the training hall. And then in powerlifting, there's one study that showed that when people hit a new PR, that was like the highest risk for them to have pain afterwards, but they still made the PR. And then a few other studies not showing that relationship. So it's kind of equivocal. Yeah, I don't necessarily buy that injury risk is higher at competitions. I do think that you might see that if you were just to collect raw data. And I think because you're going to get a lot of people whose motivations and attitudes towards weight on the bar or whatever are such that they are willing to go to that place, select the load that is beyond something that they've adequately prepared for, right? And you're self-selecting for the people who would do that to enter the competition in the first place, right? So, I mean, it's this whole thing. And then people will say, well, what about bodybuilding data? Bodybuilding has a lower injury risk. And that is true if you look at the raw data, but when you ferret it out a little further, it does not appear to be that much, if at all, lower than powerlifting. And a lot of this has to do with how you define injuries and how data is collected. And I don't want people to take that like hemming and hawing and be like, well, the data sucks, so we should just throw it out. I'm not saying that. It's just that it doesn't look to be different enough to be able to draw confident conclusions, in my opinion. Eric Helms is going to have a different opinion on this. We've kind of gone back and forth on this, and we kind of both shrug our shoulders at each other and go, yeah, well, we'll see if better data comes out.
Yeah.
So in any case, yeah, the idea that you get higher injury risk at a meet there's not really a lot of evidence supporting that. We know that even when you take high level, international level lifters and you have them do a squat at submaximal weight, 70%, that their technique changes markedly rep to rep. And we don't have good data showing that any one particular type of technique during resistance training verifiably, reliably reduces injury risk. It doesn't seem to be associated with load on the bar. Doesn't seem to be associated with velocity, provided we're talking about controlled contractions. If anything, if I was going to put my eggs in a basket based on the current literature, I would say, do you have a robust training history? So how long have you been training? Okay. And are you adjusting the training load over time to meet you where you're at? And I don't just mean over time, like week to week, month to month. I mean day to day. If you wake up and you're not feeling great, doesn't mean you shouldn't train. It just means that you may have to temper the training load for the day. The idea is, how do you predict that accurately? And for that, I don't know. Whoop isn't certainly doing that. And then there's another argument that if you try to do this before you get in the training session, that you may create this narrative of pain or injury.
Not ready.
Yeah. Or you're fragile today. But the whole point is to have like some stops, some like hard stops in training where you're like, okay, my baseline level of performance is here. Here's my performance today. So I am verifiably underperforming today.
Yeah.
Do I need to, do all of the training volume today? Right? Because you can't just manufacture weight on the bar. You can't just be like, well, I'm just going to keep adding weight. No, you're going to fit, right? So do you need to do all the volume? Do you need to keep the overall training load the same? And in those cases, probably not. But again, if somebody put a gun to my head and say, so you're telling me that training for a long period of time in an auto-regulated program, getting more fit over time, and then adjusting the training load as needed, like those would be your things. And I'd be like, yep, yeah, pretty much. And then being lucky. And they're like, okay, cool. Gun to head. How confident do you feel? I'm like, I don't really feel that confident, to be honest.
I feel like as a coach, and of course this is a very anecdotal thing, but I experience much more, and I think Tyson too, you've talked with me about your lifters, probably all of us experience much more chronic injury within powerlifting than acute injury, at least in terms of how we have to manage it. Because like there is acute injury that happens, but it's like that typically recovers almost no matter what, unless your risk factors are much higher. Okay, and I might be talking out of my scope even more, but like if you're just slamming gear, and you're in the like raw with wrap division, and you're competing like 5 times a year, and you're also your name is Larry Wheels, and you snap your pec, you got to get surgery. Like, okay, that's going to take longer. But I feel like that type of injury is so low, like not common within the average powerlifting scope, that like we're probably more often going to be experiencing chronic base injuries. I don't know what you experience. You probably have more like rehab focused lifters that you have to work with.
Yeah. So almost 85% of injuries that have been reported in resistance training in barbell sports are relatively minor and self-resolve within 2 weeks, 14 days. The other 15%, it's hit and miss, but they tend not to be catastrophic. Like, oh, you're out for 6 months because you broke your femur, right? Or your humerus. It's like, well, you have chronic low back pain because it stays present for more than 6 weeks, something like that. As far as the risk factors for those chronic ones, we're trying to suss them out. There's a few case reports on people taking high dose anabolic steroids on biceps tendon ruptures. And that's kind of the extent that we have on this. We have a few other studies where people are taking super physiological doses of testosterone and they show no increased injury risk. But again, I think if you're looking at injury risk overall and you're trying to like stratify people into like low, moderate, and high risk, the high risk person is going to have a sudden change in their training load. And that may be due to anabolics, maybe due to return to sport, any sport, right? So you have the formal, I used to run track and field in high school or college, and I'm going to get back into it. And they go out and they try to do something similar. Pulled a hamstring, right? I mean, this is not a new story. So that would probably shift somebody towards the high risk category. Unfamiliarity with the exercises, movements, or tasks that they're being asked to perform. So this happens in strongman and Highland Games, for example, because a lot of the events, one, they're not standardized. And I'm not saying they should be standardized, by the way. They're just not. And then people don't have access to training them. And so when you're like, well, why do Highland Games and strongman athletes have
so many injuries,
higher risk of injury? Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, well, you go to an event and they're like, oh yeah, pick up this weird thing and throw it over your head. And you're like, well, I've never done that. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that as humans, like we always have to have previous exposure, but it's like, again, if you're trying to lower your risk, you would want
maybe
previous
don't
exposure.
Max out on the thing that you've never done before.
Yeah, you would want
at a
repeated sub-maximal, like sort of, access to the thing, and then develop tolerance and proficiency over time. But sometimes it's not like that. So yeah, rapid rise in training stress, unfamiliarity, bad luck. And outside of that, I don't really, again, people are like, well, where's technique going here? And I'm like, sure, man, you want me to say something about technique? Here we go. If you adopt a technique, a movement strategy that you've never done before and has had minimal to no transference from any other movement pattern you've done before, are you at a higher risk of injury? Well, yeah, probably. It's just a different task that you have no previous exposure to. And so people are like, aha, see, I got you. And I'm like, well, okay, sure. But that's why another piece of our programming puzzle, that's alliteration for all you people at home, piece of the programming puzzle is the idea that you're going to have a significant amount of exercise variety so that there are less holes in your game. Like particularly during like development processes or when people are just training for general health, it's like you don't need to just low bar back squat 3 times a week. We want you to back squat, front squat, do some unilateral work. We want different rep schemes, different velocities. Like you have this big base of physical development that then you can apply specifically later on. For the person who's been training for a long time and just wants a bigger total, like, okay, well, fine. It's not going to be quite as broad. Okay, sure. But then if you're going to a strongman competition afterwards, you're just got to be some holes in your game. And this happened to me. I did a strongman meet 3 weeks after a powerlifting meet, and Austin was there. He's like, "How you feeling?" I'm like, "Scared." He's like, "Why?" And I was like, "Because I'm the strongest that I've ever been right now, like as far as like raw force production, but I'm also the most detrained that I've ever been because I just peaked for this powerlifting meet. Like my conditioning was lower, my movement variety was much lower, my preparation was much lower." So he's like, "All right, well, everything's at RP 8 today." I'm like, "Good idea." To the extent I could modify my risk factors, right?
Yeah.
But I tell you what, though, there was $1 million on the line, or like a date with pretty, someone I wanted to go on a date with.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have gone full send.
Yeah. And then the risk factor jumps back up again, and people ask why did you get injured or whatever.
Yeah. So if you're trying to shift yourself to the low end of the risk thing, broad base of physical development, auto regulation. And when your training load changes, that you adapt, or like when your circumstances change, you adjust the training load to your current level of fitness and preparation. But specific techniques, they're like, "Oh, should I squat with my knees going over my toes or not?" It's like, well, knees going over your toes isn't inherently bad. And for many people with certain anthropometries, that's going to happen anyway. What's bad is taking a movement pattern that is novel to you and applying too much load. And I don't just mean weight on the bar. I mean intensity, volume, frequency, etc. Mm-hmm. And there are many sports, tasks, life things you have to do where your knees go over your toes. It's not an inherently bad position, or same thing with lumbar flexion. Plenty of things where your spine's going to flex, even in a deadlift where the coach views, yes, that's perfectly neutral. And guess what? Your lumbar spine just flexed.
Yeah. Great.
Oh, but
great
it didn't fully flex though. It's like, okay, so then what do you say?
Do this.
Yeah, but are there no times in your life where you need to do like full flexion?
Yeah.
Or full extension? I'm not saying it's the most efficient way to lift, but if you're saying that a particular movement is bad, then it should be bad with no load.
Mm-hmm.
It should be bad with no load as a general rule. And then if you can carefully titrate the load up, humans adapt. We do not know our upper limit for adaptation yet. We have not seen it.
And this actually, this is one of the potential solutions to our conversation about misinformation. When you're talking about these things, I don't feel attacked or threatened. And
I was getting there. No.
You were getting there. Oh, okay. You motherfucker.
Yeah.
And so I find that to be really interesting because it's really valuable that when you have a starting point of neutral but scientifically literate information helping to inform your decisions, because they have an impact on what you end up choosing, what behavior do you end up choosing, what does your habit become? And there was a narrative when I started lifting that if you wanted to be a power lifter, then you just need to squat, bench, and deadlift and just do that 4 or 5 times a week. And, you'll be good. But then it's what you're talking about now and related to widening the base to help to minimize the, amount of exercise that would otherwise be novel and potentially not that the exercise is injurious, but that you have a higher risk because you're not doing them, right? I got injured a lot when I started out because I wasn't doing anything else and I was just keeping that intensity high. And I didn't know what I was doing, and the stress was just too much for me to handle. But I wanted to be a part of this group of people who had a lot more training experience than I did, and it wasn't for me. It wasn't the style for me within the conditions I was operating under. And so one of the strategies that I like to use with friends and family for misinformation is to minimize the judgment about the talking point that they have. Because if they're on my side and I judge, then great, they're on my side and I made the other person look like an idiot. But if they're not on my side or they're on the fence, then I'm either going to offend them directly or potentially push them to the other side because my side seems a lot less welcoming than the side that's woke and found out that, vitamin C cures COVID, because however they presented that seemed innocent. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you do a great job of kind of that within your field specifically.
Thanks, man. Yeah, we try to take an approach of this related stories approach. So the idea is instead of always just doing fact checking or corrections, because there's this writing reflex where people, or the backfire effect, right? You tell them that they're wrong, like, ah! They just push back and believe even harder. And you're like, that's not really what I was going for. So in addition to like probably not trying to start out with the goal of changing someone's mind, it's trying to use a related story, basically showing people that this alternative view at least has as much value as their current view. And if you can get some social credit in there where other people are like, yeah, this happened to me too. That's how you're gonna like turn the tides here, rather than just like fact check with a PMID. And if you guys don't know what PMID means, that's PubMed Index, PubMed ID. All right, so you can go search that on PubMed. And when I actually researched into social media, how many people are like spreading just shenanigans, there's actually a lot of research on this, and it is fascinating. It is fascinating. So effectively, the higher the follower count, the lower the quality of the post. And they're evaluating the quality of the post, like, is the author academically or professionally qualified to provide information on the topic? And it's like, in general, no. Does the author cite any source of information? Like, just full on any citation. And it's like, in general, they don't. Less than 2.7% of all posts, actually, of people with over 100,000 followers, like, had a citation with respect to health and fitness information. Are the post statements in agreement with the cited references? And in general, like Alico, hey, Earth to Alico, this is what we're talking about, okay?
We're trying to help you, Alico. We don't want to diminish
seriously.
You. Just do better.
Yeah, do you need me to do this? Like, I don't have the time, but, I'm volunteering.
If you need a social media coordinator.
Yeah. And then the fourth part was like, are these post guidance, like the information in the post, are they supported by any scientific source, even if no reference was cited at all? And it's like, in general, no. So people in general are saying things without expertise, without scientific evidence supporting their claim, and they're being believed because of this reduced vigilance that's cultivated by the size of their audience. You go, oh, this post got 100,000 likes, must be legit. This person must be legit because they're popular. My guard can come down. Versus, another article, it could be by like an actual PhD in a particular topic who's like sharing their dissertation. Like, they're literally, I've been working on this for years. It has like 10 likes, and you're like, probably an idiot. You're like, no, how does this
probably
happen?
So dumb. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I feel when I post. That's why I don't have that many followers, because like I'm super smart and like it's just hard.
That's right.
Hard to reach.
Yeah, micro influencers are doing the better job than macro influencers here. Yeah. That's an interesting thing you say. You don't have many followers, and so maybe on some level you're like, it's less important. And I would say, nay, Jim, nay. I think it's much more important because you are more connected personally with a lot of your followers. The social learning that as a result of your account is very significant. Even if not in like scope, or breadth rather, like how many people, but the how you're reaching these people, it's very important. People with like 1,000 followers and they post some like misinformation, harmless or whatever, they think it's harmless. I'm like, well, even if it's wrong, like it's only 1,000 people. It's like, bro, in human history, if you could connect with 1,000 people, that's like huge. That social learning effect is also large. But yeah, and then how do you combat that? Do you slide in their DMs and be like, nope, wrong? Link to an article. No, the street epistemology guy. You ever watch that YouTube channel?
Yeah.
Oh, dude,
I haven't.
Okay, Jim. Look, read The Death of Expertise, and then go check out this YouTube channel. So effectively, he goes up to people a lot of times on the street, hence street epistemology. Sometimes college campuses, whatever. And he's like, "What is something that you believe to be true? Like, what is something that you strongly believe to be true?" And he basically keeps going in, and try to figure out, why do they believe this? Is it based in evidence? Is it based in just the belief system? Just cause? And tries to get the people to kind of understand that a lot of the things that we believe are just made up stuff that we really have no reason for. But people get heated. And he's very polite. He's very charming. But people get really mad at him because he's kind of low key just challenging their beliefs. I mean, right to their face. And people get super, super mad. So yeah, fortunately that rarely happens on our social media pages. The last time I really experienced that was when I was talking about 531. Just because, look, man, 531 as a base template for programming is not great. And I could just recapitulate all the reasons why. There's nothing unique about going from 5s to 3s to 1s. You're just changing the stimulus. So you're selecting for different adaptations. It's not a great progression model. The auto-regulation, where's that at? Like the inherent prioritization of these 4 particular lifts, like why? And so the whole point is like, not that you can't modify it enough to meet or exceed the physical activity guidelines and like tweak it enough where it suits your individual needs for performance. It's just, why are you starting there? There's plenty of other stuff on the internet that you can pirate or get for free than that. And it doesn't mean I think the gym's a bad person or whatever. It's just like, but yeah, Reddit hated that.
I got kicked out of my powerlifting like club because I wanted to tell pretty much everyone on the team why like 531 shouldn't be the base program that's given to everyone that joins the team.
See, there you go.
You know? And they're like, why not? And I was like, well, it's just like, there's just so much better. Like, why wouldn't you make something a bit more catered to them? Like, well, it's not available. I can't be making programs for everyone. I'm like, well, I don't know. It just seems lame. And then I said, fuck you guys. I'm doing my own thing. I don't appreciate how I handled that myself, but similarly.
Well, same, yeah. When I was on Reddit, because people like posted my article and were like, oh, F this dude. He's, shitting all over 531. And I'm like, I wasn't shitting over Wendler as a person. I was shitting over the actual program, which, like I said, I think that argument stands on its own. But when I was responding to these people, I did it in a way that I think was too confrontational, too aggressive. And the only way that I could have either opened them to a different perspective or got my point across was by making them feel stupid. So they'd have to like accept, or like, well, I'm an idiot. So, I'm glad this guy told me, right? And if those are your only 2 options, like you're not going to be very effective. So I deserve to be kicked out of that to like learn that lesson. Although,
well,
in my defense,
your ego, right? It serves your ego of like, I know more, and here's why I know more, instead of how do I actually change this person's mind that this program that they have been following is maybe not the best.
Yeah. In my defense, they were doing it too, but I should have, having,
and they probably started it out like that too.
They
like,
started it out. Yeah.
You're an idiot, Jordan. And then you have to be like, no, you are. Or like, or you have to be like, well, I don't care if you think that.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't. And then I'd be like, I also lift more than everyone here. So just something like that. No, I wouldn't say that because that wouldn't work either. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I imagine it's hard, Jordan, to find the boundaries for yourself as far as combating information. Like there's always another argument you could get into online. And there's always another, like, and you, like, you're in a position where I imagine it's hard to know where. How do you do that?
In general, I try to stick to what I consider to be like high yield arguments. And it doesn't just mean that, this person's going to engage in a fair and, respectful manner, but like when the stakes are high, somebody's talking about vaccines, medicines, healthcare, public health, obesity stigmatization, like whatever. Something. One, I have to have expertise at the topic, and 2, it's gotta fucking matter. If somebody's like front squats are better than back squats, I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like you're wrong, but also just like who cares, right? Even if you have 1 million followers, like I can't, right? But if somebody's like vaccines don't work to reduce adverse events, and there's fetal tissue and like whatever, I'm like, this oppression cannot stand, man. I gotta go in on this. And it's not really for the person saying it, because I do not expect them to change their mind. I do not expect them to be open to scientific evidence. Because if you believe that stuff, like you're
over there already.
Yeah. But I want people to read this stuff, other people to read it, that social learning stuff. And if they happen to click on my profile, they're like, oh, well, he's actually a doctor. This person is a chiropractor. I don't understand. Like, or this person is just, they call themselves like a movement doctor, but there's no credentials or whatever. And that's my general rule. The exceptions to that, if somebody comes to like our Facebook group's got like, I don't know, 15, 20,000 people in there right now. And in general, 95% of them, 97.5% of them they're great. And I don't mean great just like people, because they're, look, that'd be a statistical improbability. Like there's a bell curve, right? But what I mean by great is that they generally keep up with all of our information. And so if there's a question, they kind of already know our position on it. So when they're asking their question, it's usually very poignant and detail oriented. And like, okay, so on this podcast, you guys said this, and here was the reference you provided. I'm curious about this particular aspect of the claim based on this other evidence, or based on this, what this other person is saying. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes these questions aren't like, oh my God, like I'm going to blow my brain out if I have to answer another thing about knees over toes guys or the Liver King or whatever. That I'm not saying that, but in general, those are high quality questions. And again, it's in our forum, right? Like in our arena. So some of those things may not be like high stakes. Like again, like should you push these forward? Correct.
Yeah. And you're helping people that like trust you and they're waiting
already.
for your
Exactly.
help.
Already. Yeah. So in general, high stakes stuff, or people who are already kind of like familiar and trust us, I always feel like you owe it to them, or they're in our arena. But look, man, still get some BS. Yesterday's debacle had to do with testosterone replacement therapy. This guy's like, from Rogan's on TRT and blah, blah, blah. And, these people are like, TRT's for everybody. I wish it would stop being, so taboo. And it's like, dude, do you know what's happened to the TRT industry in the last 10 years? It went from $100 million a year to $5 billion a year. Yeah, that's some growth. And why did that happen? Medical marketing. Do you have low T? Are you tired sometimes? And people are like, you know what?
Suck.
Sometimes, shoot,
Yeah.
put me on the juice. In addition to like societal attitudes about testosterone, anabolic steroids, and in general, dudes are like low key, like I want to hit some dingers, get TRT. But the actual evidence on TRT suggests that unless you have hypogonadism, which is clinically low testosterone below the cutoff point, measured at 2 separate times with no contraindications, things like sleep apnea, for example, then TRT can help. But if you have normal testosterone levels, getting on testosterone at a replacement dose doesn't do anything. So like when people ask me, they're like, are you on TRT? I'm like, if I was, like, what does it matter? Because that doesn't do what you think it does. But also thanks. Like, thank you for that. But if I was going to be on
people take TRT and they're taking 500 milligrams a week.
Yeah. But if when a realistic TRT dose is a fifth of that, usually when people start to half of it. But if I was taking quote unquote TRT, I'd triple the dose.
Yeah.
Also just a side note, there's this one interesting study about people who are taking 3 times the normal TRT dose, so 600 milligrams of testosterone per day, compared to those taking
per week
placebo. What's that?
Per week?
3.
Per day?
Yeah, per week. Yeah.
Okay.
It'd be cool if it was per day. It's like, bro, you're taking grams of test.
Yeah.
And so they measure their lean body mass at the end of 10 weeks, and they measure their strength at the end of 10 weeks. So the people on the gear taking 3 times the normal TRT dose gained was like almost 6 kilograms of muscle mass in 10 weeks, which is good. And the people who were taking the placebo gained 2.25 kilograms of muscle mass in 10 weeks, which is not
still
bad either.
Yeah.
He's still got a little jacked. Interestingly, their 1RM strength on squat and bench were the exact same. Not that they didn't improve, but it didn't.
Though.
Yeah. Well, the muscle strength disconnect for people. They're like, well, I see big, strong people, so I got to get bigger to get stronger. It's like, well, you're likely to get bigger, gain more muscle size as you get stronger, because you can't really separate the processes. But the idea of chasing just hypertrophy to get stronger, probably wouldn't do that.
There was like I think a recent post about that from a well-known coach. Are you referencing this?
No, I just know people say this.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, it's always the thing. I love hearing you talk about this because, and not to, it is tooting my own horn, but when I was like 18, I would say shit like that. I'm like, how do you expect to like not get stronger and then only get muscle? Like, why would you separate the processes intentionally? If your main goal is strength, like, why would you spend 8 months not doing that just so that at some point you get back the strength that you would have probably gained along the way. Like it just seems, you know.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's all comes back to, I think, because I'm forcing it here, so I can let Jordan get back to his life. You know, having a good place of reference for your decisions, because I think that they matter. And I think what Jordan is saying, if I can paraphrase, is like, stay within your scope of practice, start from a place of kind of non-judgmentalism, I guess, in how you're managing the retort, you know, like finding a common ground. So this is my addition to the solution, because these are like individualist solutions. Like, what can you do as a person to like help combat misinformation? I think one of the things that is valuable on a global scale, like we're kind of doing the thing that FDR's homie was saying. It's like we're trying to do this massive work to cut off like fingers. You know, we're going to try to cut off the whole body, and that's a lot harder. And I think that comes from more of a what's the incentive for the misinformation to be taking place, and a lot of times it's like profit, you know, and making a bunch of money. And I don't know if regulation is the answer. I don't know if censorship is the answer. It does seem like the system itself could have some significant improvements to it, but that comes with its own potential costs and probably a huge societal change. But it does suck sometimes when you're just sitting there like, well, I guess I'll just talk to my audience, you know, because that kind of is where it comes down to. It's like, I'll talk to my audience, maybe get on a debate stage on a podcast with some, like, imagine you were able to get on with Joe Rogan, you know what I mean? And you just body him. It wouldn't matter, you know, it wouldn't matter. He would just somehow make it seem like you're wrong.
Yeah. Well, our business would take off a little bit more because you get more exposure. But yeah, it's not like we're changing a bunch of minds. I mean, people are listening to that stuff, and they're the way they perceive it is based on their current worldview, and the idea that people can be objective enough to like alter that. I do not expect that, and that doesn't go for just other people. That's me too, right? Yeah. So like we're dumb humans, all of us. Some of us have a little bit of knowledge, expertise, and wisdom in a particular niche, and you know, if you have questions in that arena, go to them. But we're all biased. We all have, you know, worldviews and beliefs that color how we interpret information. And I do think that we should go to, I guess, go to bat for things that have high, potentially very, very deleterious consequences, high stakes stuff. And when we talk with other humans, talk to them how we'd want to be talked to. I mean, it may feel good to call somebody a fuckface idiot. Yeah. Like, you know, oh, got him.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like, what's the point? Like, offending somebody makes you feel good, but has no impact on their behaviors. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is affect behavioral change. If not them, other people. But if somebody else reads your comment and says, wow, what a dick, losing that.
Just tell your friend in the DMs how you feel about the person you're about to debate with, and then debate with them normally so that you can at least get the anger out. That's been my strategy.
Yeah. Vent elsewhere.
Yeah.
So the cool thing, Jordan, I think that about your approach or perspective of barbell medicine is that I want to say you do change people's minds, but I think upon reflecting, it's more of like you're giving people permission to change their own mind. Like the door opens to it, and it's a longer process. It's a long game, but
that's been our idea. I mean, we try not to be issue advocates as much as possible. Rather, just be like, here's the information. Do your thing with the big brain. That being said, we're not always perfect on that either, because some stuff does actually, you know, matter. And I feel like if we were just robots and we had no real opinion, then we would just be computers. So, but I like that you said that. That means a lot, because that's kind of what we've been trying to do. When people ask our opinions on highly politicized matters or other stuff like that, we intentionally shy away from them, not because we don't have opinions. We are, again, humans. We'll interact with our environment, but the information is bigger than we are and bigger than our opinions. And again, lack of expertise in policy making kind of gets us off the hook here. So like to just provide people information and then kind of let them do what they want with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So speaking of that, if people don't know already, they can find your website, barbellmedicine.com, for most things in this scope of practice. Isn't your Instagram just Jordan Feigenbaum or Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum?
No, I think if somebody's using that Instagram handle, it's
it's not him.
It's not me. Yeah, I'm Jordan _ Barbell Medicine, which is
right.
What people, that's what they call me in public.
Yeah,
I think Barbell Medicine's easier to say than Feigenbaum. Yeah. But yeah, that's my account. Our main account is Barbell _ Medicine on Instagram. We have a YouTube channel, Barbell Medicine. We got a podcast. Guess what? It's Barbell Medicine. I know, big surprise. And then if you guys have email, like questions you want to ask via email, you can contact us, support@barbellmedicine.com. I know, very original. But yeah, if you just Google Barbell Medicine and a question, the odds are we got something on it.
Yeah.
We got something on it, probably.
Tight. Hey, well, thanks so much for spending some time with us talking about a wide variety of things. Hopefully the listeners at home enjoyed this one. Season 2 is officially underway, so this might be the peak. It might not be. I don't know. Hopefully we got some better challengers.
If this is the peak, we got to get you a better guest.
Yeah, Tyson, Jordan, thanks for being here, guys. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, man.